Housing benefit, which is also known as local housing allowance, is a payment from local authorities to help households with the cost of their rent. It's a means-tested benefit, not an out-of-work benefit. It applies to people in social housing, to people in the private rented sector, to pensioners, to disabled people, and to households with low incomes, as well as to the unemployed. The cost of housing benefits, which is administered at the moment by local authorities, is ultimately met by the Treasury, and the total has more than doubled since 1997, which is why when the coalition government came to look for cuts in their budget in 2010, housing benefit was a very attractive target. There's a myth that housing benefit is putting huge sums of money into the pockets of work-shy scroungers. In fact, though, most housing benefit is paid direct to landlords, and the reason why the bill's gone up so much is because rents have gone up, rather than because tenants have been very greedy. The government cuts have come in the form of a raft of changes which have been gradually implemented, starting in April 2011 for new claims, and then being phased in gradually for existing claimants. I'm going to talk about three of the really significant changes. In the first case, local housing allowance or housing benefit used to be tied to the median rent for properties in the area. This has been brought down to the 30th percentile. That means that only the bottom 30% of properties in any area count towards the total that local housing allowance can be set at. This is being felt right across the country, so we know that people in Blackpool and people in London have both been experiencing a gap of about £20 a week when this new rule came in. The government have set caps for the maximum amount of housing benefit that can be paid in a week. These range from £250 a week for a one-bedroom property up to £400 a week for a four-bedroom property. These caps are really affecting people in expensive areas, like central London, but also in areas where there's a really lively rental market, so for example towns with big student populations. From January 2012, another new change comes in. People aged between 26 and 35 will no longer receive enough benefit to allow them to live in self-contained accommodation. They'll have to live in a room and a shared flat or house instead. This will affect people who are already living in their own independent accommodation and will mean that they no longer get enough money to pay their rent. They'll have to move. This is even worse than it looks because we know of nowhere in the country where there's enough shared accommodation for these people to move into. Further changes, or should I say further cuts, will be introduced in 2013 when the universal credit is brought in. But there's a lot more detail on this, and you really need to look on our website to find out the rest of the information. All this information about changes and cuts is very depressing, so what can you do? Well, the best place to start is by downloading Housing Justice's Blueprint for Action on the Housing Justice website. This sets out 13 practical ways that churches and other groups can actually do something to make a difference to people who find that their benefit no longer meets the needs of their rent. It ranges from lobbying your local authority, lobbying private landlords, to providing practical support like food parcels, and ways of helping people manage their transition from one property to another if in the end it seems that they have to move.